Hear that? That's the sound of a patient whose health data is protected from a cyber attack. And that's the sound of a financial system that's digitally secured from bad actors. Right now, there's an invisible war being fought on a digital battlefield that impacts what we do every day. That's why at Peraton, we do the can't be done to help protect the vital systems we rely on. Because if we don't, the alternative is unimaginable. Peraton.
Welcome back to the Direct-to-Video Connoisseur podcast. As always, Matt here, and this week I'm joined by a very special guest. I've got Cam Sully from the Jacked Up Review podcast, which I was a guest on, and also you write for the Action Elite. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a dream job come true. Literally, in both college, I was discovering. This was back in 2012, believe it or not. I was discovering. DTV Connoisseur, and I just was loving the outrageous humor, awesome parallels, and again, history lesson, and just a feel good about discovering all these cult movies and independent films that could only be distributed through, videotape and DVD. And to see the Action Elite getting featured more and more, it was becoming the Dread Central, except instead of horror movies, it was becoming for, action adventure movies. And when I got shockingly invited to join them last fall of 2019, I was like, Jesus, that this is resurrecting my soul and my otherwise lifeless security job. I need this. This is great.
Excellent. Yeah. And I got to say, like I mentioned, I was a guest on your pod back in January, which that episode is now live. But we had a really fantastic conversation. It felt like, let's put a pin in this and we'll pick things up on my podcast and sort of keep it going. So I'm really happy to have you here and have you chatting with us, again, kind of furthering our conversation.
Likewise, because I was literally talking to an icon, who happened to be, not necessarily just a celebrity, but a reviewer. It's like talking to the Roger Ebert of direct-to-video everything. I'd already talked to you and Mitch Lavelle of the Video Vacuum, and and then I talked to Kent Hill, from Podcasting Them Softly, and just his various wacky books. He's very much like Outlaw Vern, and just to talk to all these other just beloved icons who are kind of becoming secondary, and so with Action as it is, because it's just cool to have that kind of feedback and just going back and forth. It's kind of like when Joe Blow first launched and everyone was talking about Harry Knowles,
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm so glad to be here to just talk about cable TV and TBS, because everybody's has different memories and just that nostalgia. Even YouTube doesn't portray enough of a picture. It's just so cool to just kind of have that kind of general kind of history outline of it's very much how we are with our radio stations, just everything we're hearing, is like we even have our alternate histories. It's like, well, there's plenty of other stuff that was in the top 250 or whatever playing, whatever chart playing list, but doesn't get played anymore unless it's 2 a.m.
Right now, and that is one thing I think too. I noticed because listening to a few other episodes of your podcast that you kind of talked about the TV aspect of nostalgia, and I think it is an important part of it because, the VHS part of it is always important because well, one, they look really great on Instagram. I mean, I don't know if you on Instagram, if you follow Ty Action Rocks from Ty
Yes, I do.
Comeuppance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, his collection is amazing. You see those pictures? I mean, they are fantastic. But he's someone that Ty and Brad have talked about that the TV aspect with them, and I know you with Action Elite, you've been writing about some of the current action TV shows.
I was pretty much the go-to TV guy because I just noticed there wasn't that much TV shows on there, so I'm like, okay, well, shit, I'm gonna review everything with Don Johnson and Richard Dean Anderson and just all these other B-movie favorites, as well as just the latest stuff. I made sure to give a recent review of Yellowstone, Treadstone, and got a few Longmire and Justified and other just cult shows coming our way. I mean, and fortunately enough, I had a few other buddies. I knew them from either Action Elite or from a few, believe it or not, Mystery Science Theater theme groups. And one of them goes by the name Candy Allison Smith. She's just launched her horror podcast. And then Rob Anticora, who's also best known as the Cinema Drunkie, that blog site, is launching with his buddy Ricardo a Star Trek themed podcast. And they also kind of make it a little Brooklyn themed because that's where they originated from. And so it is kind of cool how everybody's kind of jumping on the podcast bandwagon. And so now it's just a matter of, hey, if you don't, if it's not for money, if it's not about advertising, how do you stand out? So it's like, okay. And fortunately enough, it was just cool just having you on as well as just a bunch of other people on, because I was just like, hey, what do we want to see in a podcast? That's kind of what you got to do, because everyone's going to kind of take another formula that they heard on some other radio or podcast and just kind of play around with that. And so I was like, hey, let's recast some cheesy B movies or Mystery Science Theater themed stuff if they had a bigger budget or more competent crew. And that was just kind of the fun essence of it all. So to be called here for TBS, this is just a blessing because, I mean, I was 14, when they were doing their TBS original movies. So, I mean,
and it's interesting when we think about TBS because I think they really do have a place in sort of the development of action movies, especially for like the home viewing market. And I think you mentioning being a Misty, I think is important because I think all of us, being Misties, I think it added a level to watching TV for us where it's like, you grow up watching movies with family and you make fun of it, you make jokes. I remember watching Lethal Weapon 2 with my dad, and I'd always had this idea that like low budget movies, like old 60s 50s 60s sci-fi that they would show on TV at that time, I understood that was something you made fun of, but there was this idea that, well, if it's a big screen movie that has just got this huge campaign, Mel Gibson, Danny Glover everywhere, there was an idea that you don't make fun of those movies. And I remember watching that with my dad, and my dad, like, just essentially like in this dry, like, commentator type voice, essentially called everything that was happening in the movie before it happened. Like, oh, okay, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, the bad guys just ran. Yeah, go chase the car down the road. Oh, now it's time to kill the girl off. Yeah, it's time to do all, And I'm thinking like, wow. So even these big movies can be cliche, and I think it changed a lot of how I saw movies where it was, and of course my dad probably never remembers this ever happening, but it was something that kind of changed, how I see movies. And then of course MST3K comes out, and I actually watched that with him, when we were watching it together in the early 90s. And that was sort of this idea that not only can you just make jokes about movies, but you can have your own commentary track throughout the movie with your friends. And that just took a whole bunch of movies that I think you looked at before and said, like a Roadhouse, which we'll be talking about,
oh yeah.
Yeah, it was a movie that it was kind of just like a throwaway action movie in the late 80s. Now it becomes something different when you're able to sit there with your buddies and riff on it about this idea of a legendary bouncer and all of that. What are your thoughts on that? Sort of how, especially with the way cable TV changed over time, but sort of the way we kind of interact with movies now.
It's a very good point because, I mean, now the cable channels, it's hard to distinguish them now.
Right.
I mean, because, AMC was always the one, that's what originated in them wanting stuff like Mad Men or Breaking Bad. They were airing Falling Down and all the Death Wish movies and marathons. And Sci-Fi Channel, they were airing legit, just cult movies as well as more recent stuff. It was not uncommon to see on occasion the Star Trek movies as well as just more drive-in stuff like the Alligator films, anything by Lionsgate. It wasn't uncommon to see a boring Albert Pion fight fest on there. There was plenty of other stuff like the Leprechaun as well as I'm trying to think. There was another bunch of key stuff, just Event Horizon, just very edgy, always trying to change the game and take a lot of cult movies while mixing it in with legit original TV productions before they decided let's, do deliberately cheesy stuff,
Right.
And yeah, TBS was definitely, it's always so wild. I mean, they've always kind of maintained that we're going to air a lot of comedic stuff, but at night, we're going to air a lot of unusual movies that TNT's airing less of, and, just kind of, like you say, creates a whole new kind of cult station. There's a lot of people I talked to who talked about how they discovered so much stuff from there. If they weren't watching a Patrick Swayze movie, they were definitely watching I Come in Peace, also known as Dark Angel, with Dolph Lundgren, as well as like you say, the Lethal Weapon stuff was never uncommon. You'd see so many other just kind of cult movies on there. I'm sure Caddyshack used to get played on there a bunch. And TNT was always just kind of, even before the whole We Know drama, they were just kind of legit. They had to. They made watching edited movies so much fun, especially when they modified it, because they were always just looking for just edgy content. It's like it wouldn't be uncommon. Just you wake up at 6 or 7 in the morning, you'd see some new edgy thriller with some famous star hanging off a cliff.
Right.
I remember. I think it was Switchback with Dennis Quaid. Spoiler, fighting serial killer Danny Glover. Then there was Ricochet, which was an HBO original movie with Denzel Washington being terrorized Cape Fear style by psychopath John Lithgow. And so it was very around 2004, 2006. That's when I pretty much recall that just basically everybody was taking that's where the networks definitely changed up their programming. Much like Brett and Ty's Video Store Memory, I definitely remember when, they started totally changing and fucking, excuse my French, with all.
It's okay. We have the explicit tag, so you're okay.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, they started messing with all the programming. It's like, whoa, everything's changing all of a sudden, and so, I mean, USA Network was always kind of edgy from what I recall, but all of a sudden you started seeing them go, it's like, we're not going to air reruns of Coach or Wings anymore. Now we're going to air, we're already airing, the Law and Order shows reruns, but now we're airing a bunch of other edgy content. We're airing a lot of edgy movies,
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned the mid 2000s because, what happens at that time is that, TNT, I guess at that, I don't know, Ted Turner was like buying up a whole bunch of stuff, and I can't remember exactly when he acquired the MGM catalog, but there's a point.
I'm not sure either.
Yeah, somewhere around there, but I
know because TNT used to air a lot of, they were pretty much Turner Classic Movies,
right?
Channel 2.
Yeah.
And then they just realized we can't, what's the point? We got to air more recent stuff. And so, yeah, they would always air, 80s and 90s hit movies. It wasn't uncommon to just have a bunch of Bruckheimer type stuff on there. And it seemed to be more stylish post 2006, 2009, because that was more fun just seeing how their channel, them and Sci-Fi's channel voices got even deeper and deeper. But going back to TBS, it is funny how they were kind of the ones who briefly experimented with the whole just let's make original movies on our cable channel.
Yeah.
And do you by any chance have any memories of Dinner and a Movie?
Yeah, so Dinner and a Movie, I remember. That
was my introduction to him.
Yeah, now was that the one that had Bobby Bacala from, or that wasn't Bobby Bacala. There was another one that had Bobby Bacala and I cannot remember her first name. Howard Stern's wife, who does the Kitten Bowls now, which my wife and I like to watch.
I did not know that, but I just remember every kind of movie being on there. The Sister Act movies, even Blue Lagoon, Lock Up with Stallone. So yeah, and their website which I think got taken down by around '06. I mean, they would
Mhm.
even play other more recent movies that were just outrageous, like, the Rush Hours, Men in Black, Ballistic X versus Sever, and even The Mummy.
That's
And
right.
they were, I mean, in Demolition Man, that was another introduction to him. But that was my indication that, hey, these movies are edited for time and format, but it's still kind of cool to see something that's just out of this world. All these kind of cult kind of films, and so it was interesting how. Do you by any chance remember Ripley's Believe It or Not? That was another
That's
groundbreaking show hosted by
yes.
Superman himself, Dean Cain. And
Dean
next thing you
Cain.
know, I think it goes off the air around '02, but by '04 or '06, it's on, syndicated on Sci-Fi Channel. And I liked how they experimented with that. It was just morbidly fascinating without being just, flat out, trash. It was just fun. But yeah, no, from like around 2001 to around '04, '05, that they had a bunch of actually, yeah, it was just '04. They pretty much had to close down. They just weren't getting any viewership despite doing original movies. But a lot of people remembered their stuff because it was around the same time Sci-Fi Channel's doing it, and then Lifetime Channel's trying to put their feet in the game, and they start, Lifetime kind of gets infamous a little later because it's just the same formula every time,
Right.
single white female.
Yes, the
Uh,
wrong movies with
right.
David Dakota and Eric Roberts and Vivica A. Fox. I know those
Oh
are
yeah.
really popular
And
now. Yeah,
yeah.
it's amazing. I mean,
Before,
you would
it's funny. They recently have kind of changed their They've changed their management again. I mean, they're still having those schlock movies as well as their classic ones, but now it's like when they're not doing that, now they're getting entirely different shows to syndicate now. It used to be
right.
they would just air reruns of sitcoms like Sybil, Frasier, Will and Grace, and now they're changing it up to totally different stuff. Now they're playing just more like stuff reruns of like The Closer, and even just different types of reality shows. Now they don't want to be just Oxygen or AMC 2.0. Now they're just like
Right.
any true life story, or like we're going to start airing movies like Taken now, and now we're going to look for a Goodfellas type movie or another true life serial killer movie, in addition to doing all the schlock that makes ratings go up. So, and Sci-Fi Channel, they kind of stopped doing that. Occasionally they will air an asylum movie that they're premiering, but it's kind of wild how now they're going back into the mode that they were around circa '97. Do you remember the show First Wave?
Oh yes, yeah.
Very fun cult movie. I always knew about it, could never catch it, and yeah, Sci-Fi Channel was also cool with its website, how it would introduce people as well as signify any cult appeal. I remember even they defended Battlefield Earth as like the spaceships are amazing in this movie. They would defend every kind of sci-fi movie airing on their station, but they definitely went for a lot of more just kind of very edgy stuff, like just John Carpenter's Body Bags. They would air a bunch of other just more just mind-bending kind of cult movies that had previously aired on UPN, Showtime, as well as and this is before they even bought the rights to air the remaining seasons of the new Outer Limits and of course Stargate SG-1. So it's just interesting how they were all just changing about. I mean, they even tried more edgy miniseries or 2-night or 1-night movie events, like a loose sequel to Firestarter, but it was kind of done in the style of the X-Men films. And
Right.
they had
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
then there was Clive Barker's Soul Seeker or something, which was not a hit, but it's good on paper, but it's just another one, just someone horror maestro puts their name on it. It was just always interesting what they were trying to do back in the day, but God, I don't know how anyone really even saw their movies because they did air them so damn late. It's like, unless, and so I lucked out. I was able to watch a bunch of stuff, after school. I mean, because I wasn't going to read. I was going to watch every
Right.
kind of crazy movie or show and see what my classmates were even talking about. And I mean, TBS was definitely an interesting one because they kind of just killed their movie outlet before it got going. I think it could have improved. And I mean, you've reviewed a bunch of their movies. I mean, there's Red Water with Lou Diamond Phillips and Coolio. Then there's
Right.
which was a crazy, unusual take on the Jaws formula, and it made sense. Lou Diamond Phillips had already been in a few creature features, like, the First Power and Bats, and the other one that I saw promoted a lot was a pre-Criminal Minds, Thomas Gibson. He and Katherine Heigl are, it's basically a knockoff of the First Power as well as Fallen with Denzel, just dead serial killer, in supernatural form, terrorizing a top-notch, profiler. And that got it was Evil Never Dies. That was the name of it. 2003 it premiered. There was Invincible with Billy Zane, Brian Mann, and in the bold letters it said, from producers Jet Li and Mel Gibson. And I think Joel Silver also produced it, but they added that extra name power, because it's just fresh off. Martial arts are becoming a thing now with Matrix and Kiss of the Dragon type movies out. And it was cool to just see every channel kind of having an identity. Now, don't get me wrong, they do have their identity now, but it is still annoying how, I'm not sure anyone would really be watching TBS if they didn't play, Friends and Seinfeld, and, now they have Conan. But it would have been interesting to see how they would have gone on. I don't think any of these channels would have survived. They had to just pretty much cater to identity far from themselves. That's just part of the market, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's interesting with TBS because, when it's funny because they, in the mid 2000s. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. With TBS, it's interesting because in the mid 2000s, they they pick up movies like Roadhouse, and I remember reading an article in GQ, which I could not find the actual article. I found an article that they did about like the what they call the 25 most the 25 baddest or worst movies ever, or best bad movies or something like that. And Roadhouse was number one. And they also talked with Kevin Smith about Jersey Girl. He talked about how how a bad movie happens, how he didn't intend Jersey Girl. He was talking about Geely when that movie came out, how bad that was, and
that was his response to that. He's like, I want to do at least a good movie with these two stars in it,
right? And it ended up being just as bad.
Even though it was still pretty ridiculed.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny you bring up Kevin Smith because Roadhouse has been not only just remastered and re-released so many times. And like you say, TBS and TNT reruns. That's where I recall seeing it a lot. And then it was weird. Then by at least 2006, I was seeing it get played on even other stations like FX cable would play it every once in a while, I think, and then Spike TV, so it was weird how it just changed handlers every once in a while. Now, if you want to find it, the channel that airs it most often, besides one of the paid channels, is Country Music Television. So it's interesting how everybody's lost their identity. I would say out of all the Turner stations, though, that have evolved, TNT's airing pretty much every other blockbuster now. So like it's not, instead of just airing Matrix or Die Hard with a Vengeance for the billionth time, now they've stopped even airing like reruns of their typical shows. Like you're no longer going to see Bones or Law and Order on there. Now you're going to see just Supernatural and they used to do CSI New York. Now they don't even do that. Now it's like do you remember when they would they and Sci-Fi Channel would both air X-Files reruns?
Oh yeah.
And that was a cool introduction to that. And now it's like no more. Sci-Fi Channel or BBC America is the only one that's airing X-Files reruns now. And Chiller used to do it too.
Does Disney own X-Files now when they bought Fox? So they're going to either vault it or put it on Disney Plus. It's going to be one or the other. It's
I don't think they could, because it seems like all the Fox TV shows, unless it's like a kid-friendly thing, they're just going to remain on Hulu.
Yeah. Oh, good point.
Because they said we'll stay out of your TV department, but unfortunately, the movie deals that were going on, is like they've pretty much just killed them all. So I was like,
it's a shame. Yeah.
It's interesting though. Do you remember how Sci-Fi Channel for the longest time, just kind of like how Cartoon Network for the longest time, that they were, they still will only, even Adult Swim's not the same as it used to be. So they will only air their latest stuff, and you have to get Boomerang if you want to air the old school cartoons. Yeah. And that's kind of what Sci-Fi Channel did with the Chiller channel. but then that went defunct about circa 2016, 2017. 2017 it was, and they were airing so much stuff. It's like, oh, I wish they would, they would air this. They were airing reruns of every other kind of 80s show, like, the Nightmare on Elm Street show, Friday the 13th show, as well as a bunch of other just cult TV shows, as well as just cult movies. It's like, oh, I've heard about that. I've never seen it. It's got Brad Dourif, it's got Tobin Bell, it's got these kind of horror maestros, and I was introduced to so many other just Twin Peaks, X-Files knockoff shows on there, and that there were some good ones. There was this one called The Gates that had a then unknown Frank Grillo, pre-Purge, pre-Captain America, and it ends on a cliffhanger, but it's worth seeing. And there was a bunch of other just shows that I got into, and it's like, oh, I wish they would air these, because these are just legit, just very well orchestrated. Now, Sci-Fi's gone back to, let's see what other Canadian show we can export, because clearly we're not going to buy or create anything new. It's just not, we don't have that much traction, unfortunately. They used to air a lot of every other kind of Star Trek show rerun, but even that just kind of failed after a while. It just wasn't getting ratings, unfortunately. And they just killed everything else just way too soon. They just, Battlestar Galactica, Eureka, but then again, to be fair, they had bad management. They were just like, oh, it's just for geeks. So once word about that got out, it just became pretty clear they didn't respect their fan base. TNT's kind of a mess now. I mean, they're not bad if you want to see one of the latest blockbusters. So if you want to see something like, every other thing from Universal, Lionsgate, or even Disney and Warner Brothers, it's definitely going to be there in their vault. But ironically, the one that's kind of evolved the most and kind of keeps going is Turner Classic Movies. Everyone just keeps coming back because now they really are changing up and seeing what stuff in their vault they haven't aired in, centuries. Everyone's really digging their Friday nights because, by midnight they start airing a lot of cult, drive-in type movies.
Yeah.
And it just was always so wild because they very rarely would air, TVMA type movies,
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they would, but and occasionally they did get some hate mail. As like every once in a while they would do Oscar week and they would air, whatever won Best Picture. And I think, within these last few years they've aired Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. Is like, no, that's too soon.
Right,
but
yeah.
I can understand Heat or LA Confidential, but no, it's, past 97, you've lost me.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think the thing to always, that, going back to the mid 2000s or even kind of like the early to mid 2000s at that time, on demand was a relatively new thing. There was definitely no Netflix streaming. There's no streaming. There was, so if you wanted something at midnight, if you wanted to watch something at midnight, you could fire up the VCR or the DVD player and put something on. But if you just wanted a TV, a lot of times TBS and a midnight airing of Roadhouse was what was going to do the trick for you. And nowadays you just fire up your streaming device and you just pick from any number of things to watch, and it's very easy. And it's I do it a lot of times to fall asleep at night. I'll fire something up, or my wife and I will fire something up, and but at that time it was very different, and I think that really changed. I think a lot of how. TBS was doing something different at that time where they were like, we're going to put movies on, Roadhouse, we have Roadhouse, we own it. It's not going to do anything for us at noon. It's not going to do anything for us at 8 at night. But if we put it on at midnight, we're going to do better in that slot than a lot of other channels are doing at midnight. And,
yeah.
For people of our ilk, it worked really well because we were happy to see it there.
Yeah, we were either staying up too late or, if you were a mom or a dad in that respect, yeah,
right, yes.
you got back off of your, work at 5, and you either fire up a TV dinner and sit down with the kids, or just it's either that or sports. You definitely wanted something, and it was kind of, becoming an edited format, of their other Time Warner, channels like Cinemax and HBO. But then it was just kind of more, just kind of pioneered, it was like, this is cable TV. You were seeing, all our channels have an identity, and this is before USA Network, goes from being just a comedy channel to a comedy and a crime channel,
Right.
And it's like, you're going to watch Monk and Psych, which are, whodunits and just outrageously just unlike anything you've ever seen. And now they've kind of, it's interesting how all the cable channels, for the longest time, the only one that would dare to like even have like a TVMA rating, unless it was for a movie or show that even then had been modified, or they would show at 2 on a very rare occasion, because it was maybe a show that had like one, R-rated worthy episode, like X-Files, for instance. Other than that, the only one that was willing to do that was Comedy Central.
Yeah.
And this is, and already, they're no longer, part of the HBO circuit. They're not the Comedy Channel anymore. They're now just, Comedy Central. And
right.
It's interesting how they went from just, airing, reruns of Kids in the Hall, the UK version of Whose Line Is It Anyway, and they're trying to be more than just the Chappelle Show, Dave Attell, or South Park Channel. Now they're trying to do something even more different and revamped. Sci-Fi Channel even retaliates and tries to counter them with Tripping the Riff, which is basically their CGI animated counterpart, and it doesn't get Farscape or Stargate numbers, so they're back to the drawing board. It's interesting though how Comedy Central on just rare occasions, they would pretty much have a comedy special or a comedy movie, and they would air it on cut, and now they still do it, but and now it's just, now you really got to just do something to really surprise people, because now it's kind of dumb now that USA even, TNT, I kid you not, they've been getting more graphic and more TVMA rated stuff. I mean, I think it was one show I flat out saw just so much gore and even bare tits, and I was like, wow, okay,
Right.
Not something I would typically see. But USA, I mean, it's kind of silly. They'll air the various shows that they got now, some which are edgy, some which are just, whatever. This is a USA Network show. This is a summer show, but it's interesting how they might air the TVMA version or when it originally airs, and then sometimes they air it as a TV-14 version. Or TVMA, but they'll censor some of the language or other bizarre parts during the daytime. It's weird how they do it. That El Rey's doing it too, and kind of having some trouble with what they're re-airing. But no, TNT's they pretty much haven't drawn themselves into a corner, but now they're pretty much trying to become the next FX, and it's so wild because FX started out as a family channel, and don't get me wrong, they still air reruns of Married with Children and other sitcom stuff, but they went from being an experimental Fox channel, and is like now they're no longer just airing reruns. That they no longer are they airing reruns of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and even their DVD on TV. Now it is, well, what do you have that's going to be the next The Shield?
Right.
Nip Tuck.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because if you think about like the late 90s into the 2000s, you get some really big moments in TV. So, early 90s is when MTV does The Real World, and that's when, reality TV becomes a thing. And then, of course, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it takes off in the network vein with Survivor. And so there's that part of it. But then at the same time, HBO blows up with, Oz, Sopranos, The Wire,
Real Sex.
I mean, all those shows. And so these cable channels were all kind of trying to figure out, how do we fit into this new area where it's either, what HBO's doing, and how do you replicate what HBO's doing, or are you going to make more reality shows? And some of them, like VH1, obviously they went almost entirely reality. MTV went almost entirely reality. They had some scripted shows, in the evenings, but mostly reality. And TV has kind of split the difference, right? Where they were doing like the Ashton Kutcher things, but then they were really trying to show movies that they had, either making new ones or doing movies, and trying to show TV shows like they bring the Family Guy back. They kind of resurrect it, and it's interesting how TBS, what TBS did in that period, in that 2000s period. And I think for us, for the kind of movies that we like to watch, but also the TV shows too, I think there was a sense that you could do, that something like Roadhouse had a market, that something like a Point Break had a market, that there were people that would watch that kind of thing. The same way that there were people that were wanting to watch Sopranos, that there were people that were paying out, for an HBO subscription because they had to watch The Sopranos. And so that's when AMC decides, okay, we're not going to show old movies anymore. We're going to show we're gonna make shows like Walking Dead, Mad Men, Breaking Bad.
Yeah, Walking Dead was even already just kind of a silly fiasco because then
Yep.
they're just insisting this is a TV-14 rated show and everyone's
Right.
complaining about the violence, and then finally they relent by like season 3. They're like, okay, it's a TV show. I'm like, well, you can tell this is not for kids.
Right.
This is violent even by R-rated standards, and it's interesting though how, like you say, the channels do go through new identity phases. I remember, so 02 is pretty much 2002 is when I basically began the whole cable TV journey and just flip around and I, get to study everything. FX is just airing very edgy content, very crazy stuff. And it's like, everything from 8mm type movie to every other kind of shocking Broken Arrow, Die Hard type knockoff that's made for TV or direct to video, airs on in the afternoons or after 2 a.m. A&E, it's funny you bring them up because they did around like 05, 06, they tried airing edited format of The Sopranos. So like they
Right, I remember that.
censored the language and it just wasn't cutting the mustard. Everyone's just like, why do I need to watch this? Why don't I just go to the video store and rent it?
Yeah.
And so around that same time, I mean, FX would air repeats of shows that had just aired. I mean, they already had other stuff in their vault that had aired on Fox Channel. I would always remember you'd see part of Ally McBeal or just some other just kind of outrageous sitcom show that would air on there. And then they would also catch people up. They're like, okay, did you miss the initial run of Prison Break or 24 or any other kind of show? Well, we're going to marathon it the next few weekends. But A&E, I remember, would tried airing like reruns of like 24, and it just wasn't cutting the mustard. And you would have thought someone like TNT would want to have something like that, and they didn't. And so, like you say, they were definitely way more experimental, and they know their identity, but they try out new stuff here and there. And A&E after a while just says, I think they've even already just stopped airing reruns of other shows like Criminal Minds, and now they're just back to Reality City. They just can't keep up. History Channel will still show reruns of Modern Marvels, but it's just depressing because it's like this is like a 98 or 2007 era episode. I'm like, I want new stuff.
Right.
And so everybody's now they're pretty much about the sister channels are all about anything we have to share all the ratings. So anytime there's like an iHeartRadio thing, like it airs simultaneously on True TV, which used to be Court TV, which I remember for airing, reruns, uncut reruns of Profiler and NYPD Blue and, other true life murder mystery movies of the week, along with Smoking Gun, believe it or not, documentaries. Everyone forgets about that site, and which were funny, but sometimes depressing. And now is like anytime there's like an award show or even comedy event, like it'll air simultaneously on TBS, True TV, TNT, and maybe some other Time Warner owned station. But same thing here. So since whatever it is that owns Oxygen, Lifetime also owns, AMC, History Channel, and A&E, those are all part of the same like Rainbow Corporation. So they will air a lot of miniseries that will air all simultaneously. Like they did one of War and Peace. They did one that was about it was their answer to SEAL Team. It wasn't very good. It was just called Six, and it was just one of those that they do the exact same thing that USA would do. They would just air like a TV-14 version and a TVMA version. And I'm like, there's not much difference except some language is censored and some isn't. It's just stupid. And there's no difference in the violence or sex because it's not anything you wouldn't really see in a hard PG-13, but it's just stupid. And it was even more funny how they put it on History Channel. History Channel, they are apparently getting some more acclaim because they are finally putting out some better documentaries and reenactment movies. But for a while recently, they were kind of on a temper tantrum lately because they would air some stuff and it's like, these are alternative facts that the Tea Party came up with. Right. the today's Tea Party, not the American Revolution, is like this is not what Santa Anna did or anything. And these costumes, are they from like a local theater in Utah? What's this from?
Right.
And so I think they are just finally listening to the bad reviews and it's like, okay, we need a mini series that does give us an Emmy. We need, so it, like you say, some of these channels for a while they were trying to copy each other. ABC would have a few epic events because they wanted to counter, like you say, a Sopranos type show in around the 90s and 2000s. And then by mid 2000s, they're trying to come up with something that can rival something like Showtime's The Tudors or HBO's Rome, and they still can't keep up. But some of those shows aren't bad in other ways, but it's pretty much like how every other sci-fi show had to be like Star Trek or X-Files or Twin Peaks back in the day. So it definitely becomes interesting how back then, not only were they more risk-taking, but they would even, some of these channels would even air episodes that were originally unaired. They were supposed to air, but the show got canceled. So Sci-Fi Channel always became the one of, hey, if there's something from TNT or UPN, like the Babylon 5 spinoff show Crusade or some other just kind of briefly lived show, if there's 5 other episodes, sure, let's air them. And almost always everyone would think they would get picked up, and they never would pick them up unless it was by Showtime for whatever reason. They wanted those numbers, those ratings. And it would get funnier though, how, like you say, everyone would rediscover the shows on the other channels in syndication, or they would, again, my favorite that just showed me how much like Star Trek, some shows just not only get better with age, but are just timeless. No matter whether you're 14, or 35, you're just gonna love them from beginning to end. And I was a fan of this show since I was 8, and you'll never guess what it was. It was the one, the only Whose Line Is It Anyway? The American version with Drew Carey, and Wayne Brady, and it was, it was just the perfect kind of show. If there was a joke, it was much like Mystery Science Theater and Monty Python. If there was something just too off color, it's like, okay, on to the next skit,
Right, exactly. Yeah, if it doesn't work.
And unfortunately, Comedy Central was always trying to get numbers like that, and they would air some reruns of Mad TV at awkward times, but they even stopped doing that after a while, since like 2012, and that was kind of dumb. But ABC Family, before they became Freeform, they'd already been Fox Channel. But after like 2000, they got bought by Disney. Before Disney took over Fox, they were just ABC Family, and it was cool. It's like, okay, so something else. My parents are digging it. It's like, okay, we're taking some of the off-color comedies and making it more kid friendly, which inspired a bunch of hysterical YouTube videos. Is like, what R-rated movie is going to be edited on the family appropriate channel next? And but it was very important for particular fans of certain shows, because like they would air a lot of lesser played miniseries and cult family or made for TV films. Is like, oh, I remember that growing up on Nickelodeon or Disney. That was a good movie. And that was back when those channels were even taking stuff that wasn't in their vaults, but was by anything from Republic Pictures to do you remember Nest Entertainment?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
My father gave up his office, which later became the production studio for that Swan Princess producing company. And I would always just look at parts of it. And that was one of the first franchises I noticed, years before looking at other companies like Terminator, how, you're never going to get a box set of this particular film franchise because, each entry is owned by a different installment, So Nest, I think that's, I forget, that gets distributed by like New Line Cinema, and then like the next one is like owned by Fox, and then the other one is like also like Warner Brothers or something. And this is like, or Paramount or something like that. And it just, again, just for whatever reason, they could only distribute, every time they find a distribution deal, it was always with a different company. But it was cool because back then, they would even play some, Full Moon Entertainment had a kid-friendly company called Moonbeam, and some of their movies would air on Disney Channel, and it was cool. Everyone forgets this one obscure one, Magic Island. Every once in a while, my sister and I will go back and forth, and we'll tempt each other. Do you remember this movie with that? Oh yeah, that was a very brilliant cartoon, and it's cool because, you wish there was that kind of imagination now. I mean, pretty much you're only left with Pixar nowadays. Everyone else is just kind of, is like, I wouldn't even show, if I had kids, I would not show them this, it's like, there's literally a talking piece of shit in, a kid's cartoon. That's going to give them nightmares. I don't want to show them that.
Right.
But going back to ABC Family, they were really good about, I mean, before they got pretentious and would just show something as like, yeah, I don't think any parent wants to show them that. They occasionally would have some original programming that wasn't half bad. That even launched a few careers. They had this one called Chasing Life, where it's like this one gal it's kind of a Groundhog's Day formula. She finds out how to kind of redo her life and how she was actually beloved before she passed away or something like that. It was a catchy premise, kind of like Showtime's Dead Like Me, which was another show that kind of caught on in syndication when it was modified and edited for Sci-Fi Channel. And it launched the career of Atalia Rishi, who went on to do a bunch of other TV shows like Designated Survivor and what have you. But ABC Family was always finding out something different, and it was good to have that on because, this is when all the other TNT and USA are showing some kind of over-the-top movie, and FX is just showing, and Comedy Central are showing, stuff that no one should be watching, that's under 17. But Whose Line was just showed you how comedy is timeless, that, they are doing various games, they are talented people, they can sing and dance, that, and everyone thinks it's all scripted, they're making it up. It's like, no, they're not making it up. That is the art of improv, and they're introducing it. And after Drew had launched a few other spin-off shows trying to get this show to survive in some capacity, and ABC would always give them the silent treatment. At the end of the day, some of the DVDs would sell big because people were rediscovering it on ABC Family. And the producers were very weird in how they worked that particular show because, much like every other syndicated show, they had so much stuff that was basically alternate takes, so they would make alternate episodes, let alone different episodes, let alone new episodes. And so as a result, there was a bunch of new stuff that, unless you recorded at the time, it only aired on that channel. It had never aired before, and it was so cool. And that was back when they were willing to even air various shows, like have one total hour dedicated to. It's like, okay, let's air 2 30-minute episodes of a show. And I miss that. I miss those days. I think so many shows would survive because what I'm seeing now with both Fox and NBC, they're still trying out new sci-fi shows, and they never get the ratings they want. And so many people is like, you can tell when a studio just wants the show to die a violent death. It's either been costing them too much money or they just don't like it. It's amazing how after spending millions, they just want it to die without giving it a chance. And at some Emmy bait or anything. And it's just dumb because then, it always gets good ratings on Hulu. They just seem much like how everyone wants to kind of say DVD versus Blu-ray versus streaming. It's like, now it always comes down to, for networks, I mean, there's been even some illegal cases where it was pretty clear that some of them got good ratings, but they outright lied or something, or paid someone to modify it. So it's just sad. It's just like, okay, I've seen so many people even cancel their DVR subscriptions because, they didn't have a way to record the recordings. And I'm like, well, you have a DVR, but you don't have the DVR recorder, so therefore it's useless. You just you gotta pay whatever extra for that, because that's all the good stuff airs when you're, at 5 a.m. when you're at work. So, I mean, and I can't survive commercials. I can't even watch live TV much anymore. So I do have to use the DVR, and it is annoying because you kind of get a sense of what shows will survive. I know if it's a long time, pretentious doctor show, or if it's on CBS for that matter, it's going to last X amount. I don't know how they get the ratings they do, but they do. And everything else pretty much is always, unless you see it opening week and it gets, 20 million viewers, it's not going to survive. And it's just sad to still be seeing that, because, I mean, it just looks like an awkward blurb on everyone's resume. Is like a show that lasted 13 episodes. Is it even any good? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and it is the reality of it that it's there's so many factors that go into it, right? First off, it needs to pull certain numbers where it's like, on a cable channel, it doesn't need to pull the same numbers that it needs to pull on a network show, and then on Hulu, and then also, is there some kind of turnover in the network where it's like the person that was championing the show is no longer there, and so now this new person comes in and they don't like it, and so there's so many things that go into it where it's like, you almost kind of feel like, like one of the problems I have with Netflix is the way that Netflix shows work is they're like 10-hour movies. And so you get this fatigue involved, but it does feel like Netflix is a place that because they give people more freedom and they let things breathe a little bit more. Unfortunately, that's what happens is you end up with these 10-hour movies or 13-hour movies instead of more episodic TV. But it is nice if we could get that happy medium where you can get really good stuff that's happening on different channels where it doesn't need to. Doesn't need to kill it, right? It doesn't need to be a breakaway success, but it's allowed to breathe and maybe build a following over time and get that kind of cult. Because I mean, you take the Family Guy for example, which is it's not a sci-fi show, but it died. It was canceled on Fox, and then it gets picked back up, and suddenly it's like now the second longest running, or I guess third longest running, right? Because Meet the Press is the longest, and then I guess 60 Minutes, and then and the Simpsons, and then Family Guy, right? So it's like
any soap opera has lasted.
Like that's right. Those soap operas. That's right. They've been around forever too. So it's one of the longest running shows. So it's amazing. And I think that's something that with the different outlets that we have now, I think what's going to be interesting to see is how YouTube affects this process, but also how the streaming services, and then maybe to see if there's some sort of a regression back to the mean where these channels that are either doing all reality stuff or they're just doing reruns, if they maybe come back. I mean, one of the things I loved about the 2000s was that a lot of channels like USA, TBS, TNT, they would show DTV stuff in windows where it wasn't a big time, and now it's like, well, why would I show a DTV movie when I can fit in 2 reruns of Law and Order in that window? It's going to be interesting to see if maybe something like that comes back too, where
because I mean, even in the mid 2000s, they still kind of had the same kind of approach. We're going to show the newest. I mean, they would show the newest Wesley Snipes, Seagal, or Van Damme movies on there, and Spike TV was also pretty good about that. Is like they would take a lot of dubbed movies from Dimension Films and Sony Pictures that starred Jet Li or Jackie Chan and put those on there, and they would also air. Also, just the latest Dolph Lundgren or Van Damme movies on there once in a while. It got even more kind of just bizarre when after a while they just, without warning, they would just change their programming. But it was always cool to just kind of have the interaction in the early days, even when we're still using GeoCities to just see how the web. I know, I couldn't resist how the websites for these actual channels were just as, heavy in content. They were embracing it, but they had to. And now it's like everyone's just kind of looking at the digital version of a TV guide, seeing if they want to even watch anything. And like you say, because now actors aren't limited by what they have to choose anymore, now is like, I've gotten into so many stupid arguments with people is like, oh, I only watched it because of so-and-so. Now I'm not interested. I'm like, really? So I guess the content wasn't good, because I don't like it when a movie can't stand on its own 2 feet, or a show isn't intriguing enough and it's relying on just whoever's the beautiful or very talented star. And it's like, okay. Like I'm watching Tommy right now, and I have no doubt that it'll last a few more seasons because it's by the creator of Homicide and Bull, and it's got Eddie Falco from Sopranos and Oz, so it's got the star power and it's got the cast writing, but there's already plenty of other people who probably won't tune into it. They got problem with strong women, or I don't know, they're just tired of cop shows. So I mean, it is interesting how, like you say, we got so many different formulas, and then again, there's all these other shows that get a second chance and all the other ones that get ignored. So, I mean, Netflix allowed Longmire, which was one of A&E's highly rated shows that they wanted nothing to do with. They wanted more reality shows, despite the numbers not lying.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave at least 4 extra seasons to that one. And so many people I know, including relatives, I'd already been watching it when it premiered and really liking it. I was like, this is a very heartfelt, old school, modern day Western with very talented character actors. And or shall I say, it's justified, but with less racist rednecks and criminals. And so many people I know only knew about it because it was on Netflix, and they watched a bunch of it, really loved it. And the Native American themed crimes, Lou Diamond Phillips was really stealing every scene he was on that show,
Mm-hmm.
and it just hit home. It was like a poetry come to life. It was just a rare kind of show that, unless you see it, you just can't really describe it. That kind of rare show. And it's funny how every other show they bought has only lasted 1 or 2 more seasons because they don't want to have to, like you say, they are getting cheap and more kind of just, they're also kind of playing a ratings game because, their version of ratings for digital is based on the number of clicks and, how much time has elapsed watching it. I'm surprised that places like Tubi and Crackle have even survived as long as they have. I think because they're kind of doing the Amazon strategy of have a little of everything. And, after a while, certain stuff you have to pay for as opposed to stream for free, and other stuff we're just going to have to take down because the content, agreement expired. But going back to the Family Guy point, it is interesting how many shows got a second chance. It didn't seem like, I don't know what caused shows like Arrested Development to come back. I think it just was a big enough fan base and DVD sales because it wasn't getting that much play in syndication channels like HDNet. So I think, but it was interesting how they brought that one back, and then everyone was like, "We're glad it's back, but it's not really the same." So then they ended up redoing a season. I'm like, "Damn, you're allowed to do that?" I had no idea.
Yeah.
It would be interesting. Would you say Shudder's kind of going to become the equivalent of TBS for streaming? Because they're kind of taking a lot of cult stuff as well as new and edgy content that, plays at sci-fi fantasy festivals as well as, stuff that's almost as big as cons, but not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Would you say they're becoming the next one?
They could be. I think what would help Shudder is if they do something like Shout Factory did, where they have an agreement with Tubi, where you can get their stuff on Tubi. I think, one of the problems right now is that, people are locked in with Netflix and Hulu, and now they're adding Disney Plus. Like Disney Plus seems to have enough to add that, but like I know people like I think Criterion's one that not many people have added. I didn't add that one. I think to get people to add another service.
It used to be part of Hulu, believe it or not.
Right, exactly. I remember that. I remember everything was on Hulu. Oh, it was so
and
great.
And they're like, screw you, we're not splitting our profit. But a lot of people's other podcasters like Cinemassacast, which is co-hosted by the creator of Good Bad Flicks. Have you ever listened to them?
No, not yet. I've been meaning to.
They're under 1201 Radio. My good buddy, the Cinema Drunkie, introduced me to them, and they are just lovely, just very lovely people, just really like you, just looking at the philosophy of entertainment. And it was really cool to hear them talk about how Criterion, is doing just very rare, just VHS masters of stuff that you couldn't even afford these out of print stuff, and they don't even have a DVD or Blu-ray release of this certain, obscure classic, hard sci-fi 60s, 70s production. And yes, you can probably, Amazon's always been kind of a compromise, and some people have said that looks like Blu-ray quality, that looks like a really bad VHS scanned DVD print. And so, like you say, we have too many options, and at the same time, some of it's a good thing, and there's a lot of bad things in terms of now everyone has to, like you say, kind of play the lottery and how much am I going to pay per month, because the average individual can't possibly pay for all of this. I always embraced a lot of third-party movie sites. That was always kind of the go-to for me. I found out so much cool stuff on YouTube before everything started getting taken down. I did not know. I had no problem watching Mega Upload. I tried to abstain from watching stuff that was, currently playing in theaters. That was a bad, cell phone rip, but I would still just watch stuff that had recently, been ripped from DVD or Blu-ray because it was just fun and all. But And more likely than not, if I saw it on a third-party site, I would often, buy it eventually and be like, I know a friend who would love this movie, or this would be a great party movie, or just be a good movie in general for me to just loan out to people because it's that special kind of rare gem. And it, like you say, it was getting interesting. I had no idea that, they were making money off of, other people's copyrighted stuff. And so then when I saw them secretly re-upload, that's when, all bets were off. It's like, man, copyright's going to get more stricter
Right.
because, instead of just doing a harmless out of print, can't even find at a thrift store movie. Now it's a matter of, has the copyright pretty much expired and no one's going to ever release it unless they have a VHS first come, first serve. I've found out so many sitcoms, so many other just wacky cult shows that no one's ever going to find on YouTube still. And I like how we're still seeing a bunch of that. We're even seeing, rare workout tapes and promos and other kind of just cool, just kind of even blooper tapes and even comedy roasts, that no one even knew took place that are just very awesome. So there's always going to be kind of this third party. I mean, Daily Motion, I see just outrageous stuff uploaded on there all the time. Trying to get into this Hong Kong film series called The Young and Dangerous, which is about a bunch of triads fighting Yakuza and all. And it was a cult series and all, but I'm more likely to watch it on there as opposed to buy the just outrageous, box sets, some which, are only in region free format. I'm like, yeah, I can't play a VCD at this time. So, I mean,
right.
It's getting harder to even find certain region 2 DVDs on even Amazon. But like you say, and you mentioned in other episodes as well as Bread and Ties, come up in reviews podcast, it's interesting how, the whole it's rare and first come first serve, you've had to remember back in the day is gone. So now it's a matter of, can you even find it, and do you have to pay out the ass for it? I mean, you might find it at a good price, but you won't get, like you say, the cool box cover art. You're just going to get because that's part of the value, or that might be it. The seller flat out just lost the case, and he's like, I got this DVD hanging around that I know someone wants to buy for $20.
Right. Exactly. Well, again, we're just about out of time here. Before we wrap up, though, this is going to be our St. This is airing on St. Patrick's Day. You and I are talking the day before St. Patrick's Day, but this will be on St. Patrick's Day. Do you have any traditions or anything that you do on St. Patrick's Day?
I used to be, who's going to pinch whoever first. I would always go to Drake relays for reunions with my family friends in Des Moines, Iowa. I never asked them, though, if this cult movie that got aired commonly on Spike TV every St. Patty's Day, a little-known cult movie called The Boondock Saints. I never asked anyone if they were a fan of that one. And it seems like that one was another interesting one that got played on HBO and Spike TV endlessly, and then kind of I don't know how many legion of fans there are now, but that's an interesting kind of movie that I'm wondering if they always talked about doing a third one. I wonder if it will come out on St. Patrick's Day.
What happened was I think the second one didn't do too well. I think that hurt
William
them.
Dafoe even went uncredited, so he clearly didn't want to be there. So doing his cameo, returning as his smart-ass detective. So I think it's interesting, though, how everybody was like, yeah, Troy Duffy, I saw the documentary about him. He's such a douchebag. And then everyone starts seeing all this crappy stuff about Tarantino, and then you kind of see how everyone is about their morals. They're like, yeah, well, at least Tarantino's cool, even though he's a douche. So it's like, okay, well, I don't understand it, but okay.
Right, that's the rule. Right, that's the thing I think nowadays is that because we're learning that pretty much everybody is a douchebag, like you said. It's like you have to decide which ones you like and which ones you don't like. And so
it's a shame because I mean, if there's anything better about St. Patty's Day, it's definitely seeing some cool comedy or music be played on that day. And I think we're at a danger in terms of comedians kind of becoming irrelevant really fast. Because, I mean, plenty of other podcasters have brought up is like, okay, start being more, creative instead of complaining about what's PC, what's not. Right. And now Now we're getting to the point where it's like it doesn't take long for someone to use their best material and they're instantly dead. That's kind of what happened to Carlos Mencia.
Yeah.
And it's kind of what's happening right now to Kevin Hart and Amy Schumer. Instantly, we have people who are like, oh, I don't mind them, and then there's other people who's like, they were cool 5 years ago, now they suck. And so you're definitely seeing a lot of comedians kind of have to pretty much, if you're on Comedy Central or whatever current late night show, then you're gold.
Yeah.
And I like how Conan O'Brien still will have a stand-up performer do a set, and that there's someone who's mainly doing some YouTube or website exclusive performances. So I would like to hope that comedy is looking bright and that there's definitely more creative avenues. I do definitely miss the days of when there was a certain holiday and there was a certain movie marathon that would play every particular weekend on a channel. Now it's kind of just, we'll do Thanksgiving and Christmas, man, maybe even Easter, but that's it. And it's not as playful as you would say. But this has been a really cool recollection, and I would even like to see your take on what are the top 10 best TBS or Sci-Fi Channel original movies.
Yeah, I don't know. Not necessarily originals. I can't really think of a lot of their originals that I remember, but one of the things I loved about TBS at night was you'd have like something like Roadhouse at midnight or Point Break or something like that, and then at like 2, 3 in the morning it'd be something like Dallas Connection or some kind of Andy Sidaris, Julie Strain, Bruce Penn.
Oh, so that's how they discovered him. I thought it was always just from Skinamax and Showtime and even UPN.
Right. Well, because you would get them on those channels, but yeah, that was what I remember TBS and TNT would do it as well. TNT now, what do they do? Like marathons of Charmed, I think, overnight, or Angel or something like that now.
And now they've even stopped that. I remember those days, but now it's like, it's just like maybe 1 or 2 other doctor shows, but yeah, they used to be the ER channel. They used to be the they even used to have way more original shows that no one remembers, but USA Network kind of was kicking their butt. They had just some other goofy comedy and detective shows that were just basically their answer to Baywatch and JAG. And it's just so funny how now they're kind of the NCIS rerun channel.
Exactly.
They have been since like 2006. I remember that's how I discovered it, because I definitely never saw a live broadcast on CBS until years later. I've caught up with it, and I kind of enjoy it more and more, and I see why my grandmother was so obsessed with it. It's just kind of a rare mix. I mean, you see what Belisario was going for before he got fired, but it was pretty much trying to be the next Magnum PI, and then mix it with just kind of today's kind of Monk 24 audience, and then even go a step further, and now it's just kind of, it is the immortal show. I will not be surprised if it is the longest running show, because it's just, even if it's not funny, it is the rare, you haven't seen anything like it ever. It is a very crazy show. It's a comedy, it's a military show, it's a mystery show, and I think TBS could definitely experiment more. They definitely are finding their niche with trying a few different anthology comedy shows. Like there's the one God's Helpers type show with Steve Buscemi. The Last OG has been surprisingly very witty for them, and a good comeback for Tracy Morgan. And it's definitely been a better showcase for Tiffany Haddish, who's had kind of, mixed bag in terms of movie projects. But it's very interesting how they're more likely to sometimes. So going back to your original point, it seems like we're now in a quandary where channels, whoever misses out ends up wishing they had aired that show. Like that's like, it's interesting how the former head of HBO back during Sopranos era is now the head of Starz, and that Power's basically been the answer to that. But it's so funny because back in the day when The Shield and Sopranos were first airing on those respective channels, they almost did not get whatever sponsors or whatever other people. There's like, this was back when you couldn't have a bad guy be the main person of the show. And it's interesting how Dream On and Oz kind of predicted all these other edgy shows, and everyone just kind of forgets about them now just because it didn't have any too heavy on the crime elements. It was more dramatic or sexy for that matter. And so now we're just kind of getting into what's going to be the next Imitator and what's going to be the show that the other channel wish they aired. Like, for instance, Archer was offered to Adult Swim. They passed on it. They're like, there's no, even though they've done other shows with these creators, they're like, there's no way anyone's going to want to watch, an animated spy show. Right. It's a big ratings for FX now. So I think we're going to see more of that. Channels bickering over who gets to air what first. And so you just got to take it all with a grain of salt. I definitely wish there was more 2 a.m. movies. I'm definitely not seeing TBS do that as much. It seems like they've just said, we're just going to be the sitcom Cityville. So it'd be interesting to see if they try doing some more movie specials, at least do something a little different. But I don't know. What channel would you see, just to wrap it up, I guess, would be the next TBS, like on network or cable?
So I don't know that. I think that's the problem, is that right now it all feels like the streaming part of it is bigger. I don't know. It's interesting because I don't know if anybody's trying to be TBS again. I think they're all trying to be the new FX, AMC, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah.
They
everybody's got to have a Breaking Bad premise. And it's just so wild.
Exactly.
It took me years to get to that show because no one would shut up about it. And I'm like, well, it is a legit good show, but I can see why it's kind of ruined TV for everybody because it was just a rarity that slipped through the cracks. No one knew it would be that big. And so it does kind of just make me just kind of, without trying to be cynical, just be like, okay, no one can predict success, just like no one could predict how the direct-to-video market was going to be. No one can predict how certain TV was going to be an instant hit. I mean, how certain shows were going to do better syndicated versus first come, first serve. So it's definitely going to be interesting seeing Netflix kind of has figured out comedy, but Amazon's also kind of figured out comedy by airing, stock stuff as well as new stuff. So I guess you could ask yourself, is Hulu going to have anything to compete with that? Because now we got a lot of people who are, I can't go one review without someone saying this is a bastard child of this otherwise lineup on this other channel.
Right. Exactly.
So I hope Shudder becomes the next TBS, and I hope, Turner Classic Movies keeps surprising us because, God, I miss Robert Osborne.
I know, I hear you there. That's probably a good note to leave it on. I think we all kind of miss him. He was so fantastic.
And we just lost James Lipton too.
I know.
I always thought Comedy Central or TBS would have been perfect to air a Inside the Actor Studio parody.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with you there.
Zach Galifianakis kind of did it, but it was like a live show where he just interviewed a bunch of porn stars, and it's like, okay, that's not the same thing. Howard Stern's already been doing that for 2 decades now. So why not? So it's going to be interesting seeing who has to raise the bar next, what channel is going to do it at the most unexpected time, and everyone's going to want to be like that one, obviously, because now it's like everybody has to rip off the other, but everyone has to rip it off very creatively. We still have twin movies, but now it's kind of a matter of what channel has its own identity. So I don't think anyone will ever forget TBS because it just was such an unusual style. Have a bunch of sitcoms and then have a cult movie at the midnight and then have something original that's also what the fuckish.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Now, Cam, where can people find you? So, the podcast is
Jacked Up
Review.
The Jacked Up Review show. We do a lot of just kind of retro stuff. We've been kind of doing various eras of Star Trek and showing how, regardless of what era sucks, everyone's going to rediscover it, especially now in streaming. And how the takes on certain shows were just either too ahead of their time or just could never possibly be appreciated, because of other circumstances, real life tragedies. Like this year is going to be a messy year in terms of the coronavirus, but then again, you never know. More people are going to probably discover stuff they've been always meaning to check out because everyone's staying home now, unless they have to go to work. So we're definitely gonna see. We talk about a lot of retro stuff, like pretty much any 80s, 90s shows that's not getting talked about. You can guarantee you we're gonna do an episode about. So I know I'm meaning to do an episode on Cagney and Lacey with Rob. I'm definitely gonna do a episode about the Sentinel, a very beloved UPN show, and we're definitely gonna. We always do our best to just whoever I have on, whoever I'm with, we always do our homework. Like I did with Ryan Luis Rodriguez, who had a Mystery Science Theater and Blockbuster themed podcast called The Coolness Chronicles. He still releases some new episodes here and there. Mm-hmm. We did a 2-parter on the entire series of The West Wing and how it compared to, groundbreaking network and cable channels respectively. How we even quoted how David Chase of The Sopranos would always say at the award shows, I don't understand how someone can like both my show and this show, because he was a cynical guy who was like, if no one's cursing, then the truth of reality is lost. I'm like, well, fair point, but at the same time, I mean, you can enjoy different stuff. I mean, NYPD Blue was kind of The Sopranos before it was such a thing, and it's such a shame that everyone either remembers the good old days or stopped watching to a certain point, or again only remembered the R-rated content. So we talk about a lot of stuff that is very much in and of itself trying to recycle and reset the dial on the entertainment bar. And it's interesting how every podcast is kind of going to that extreme. But yeah, no, I'm going to start promoting everybody. If you have a promo for your podcast, I would love to put it on there on the block. Podcasts is, at the end of the day, are pretty much talk with your friends and share the conversation with people, and make sure it's not, make sure it's edited and make sure it's not, excessive and, it's a really good relief, after years of just struggling to make films and have time wasted by a lot of, guys who aren't even ready to make the next PM or New Image stuff. It's just been a very good sigh of relief to get everyone in a bubble. I mean, I think I'm even going to have a bunch of guys who are bigger anime guys than I've ever been and say, what are the 10 best anime fight scenes you've seen?
Yeah.
And so it's always just kind of a different topic. So, I mean, just like how you divide different subgenres, different tropes, different gimmicks, it's kind of the same kind of thing I've always kind of wanted to go for, is like, okay, what are the 10 best action movie parodies that should have been a real movie? And so I would instantly tell you, they should have totally made the Adult Swim spoof Schindler's List 2 into an actual movie. Or they should have done every other thing in The Player or Last Action Hero and just actually made that a movie. It would have sucked, but it would still been entertaining as hell. Because, and we talk about other. We'll definitely do a lot of other just kind of themed movies. Like we'll take a bunch of infamous movies. Like we might do a 2-parter with Ballistic X versus Sever and Jim Cotta. Mm-hmm. Do a bunch of other confusing spy movies, put it into a loop, kind of like how Riff Trax and Elvira and even Svengoolie would do a double feature. Mm-hmm. Put these infamous movies that were notable for having 2 famous co-stars take off their clothes. Do these 2 other confusing psychological thrillers that were, trying to be Hitchcock but weren't. Divided movies. So yeah, we definitely try to always just raise the bar, and I definitely try to get different guests each time. And podcasters want to help each other out, because podcasters in a way are kind of thinking what other people are thinking, and I don't think anyone even predicted that they would last as long as they want. It's like, this is radio, but it's not internet radio. You can listen to it anytime, anywhere, even if it's 5 years old, you can listen to it again. And it's such a blessing, because I mean, it's kind of giving a sense and showing how radio used to be the next best thing. People would listen to plays and audiobooks on the radio at a certain time. So I do think podcasts are the next biggest thing, because now people are going to certain sites that have certain podcasts. So, I mean, I hope you continue to find new and different platforms to show your podcast on also,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's kind of the goal, right? It's just to kind of get the information out there. Well, yeah, and speaking of that, people can find me as always. It's the usual places. DTVconnoisseur.blogspot.com is the blog. Yes, that's the old blog. DTV Connoisseur on Twitter and Instagram. / Direct to Video Connoisseur on Facebook, and then the podcast here. We are on YouTube. I'm sorry, not YouTube, but we're on iTunes. Stitcher, Spotify. We are looking to try. I'm trying to get the podcast on YouTube. So, I'm recording here on Skype, you and me, and the other podcasts I've recorded on Skype. So they record as a video file and an audio. Then I convert it to an audio file. So I'm just trying to get. Right now I have like such limited capacity here. I'm just trying to get something where
you might try Podbean and Anchor.
Yeah. Well, no. What I need to do is I just need to combine it because I put the theme song on after we do the show, so that's the thing right now. So just
nice.
Getting the theme song added to it to make the video. Once I have that, I'm going to put them on YouTube too. So probably like the last 5 or 6 podcasts that I've done will be on there. So
means I'm looking forward to your next sports parallel or paradox to describe whatever cluster of a movie you just came across.
Yes, it's always good to use the sports ones there.
I mean, after raving about Denise Richards, I think in the Dolph movie Altitude, I think you need to watch more of her movies. I'm definitely been struggling to come up with a top 10 movie list.
Yeah, for sure.
For one of the
definitely
most infamous, beautiful, and most talked about actresses who has been in every kind of movie, just like Vivica Fox. Just one year she's hot, 1 year no one's talking about it. Then next year everyone's like, oh yeah, the one actor or actress who I used to follow in whatever movie. So it's interesting how you have kind of re-ranked how people look for familiar faces. And I mean, it was just brilliant from the start how you're like, I'm already tallying how many times I've seen him on my blog.
Right. Yes. Well, that's always part of it. It's kind of fun. Is how many of the movies have we done from that person? Because it shows you in the thing there. So it's kind of part of the fun there.
How to make a living and be recognized for a totally different kind of fame, like be infamous for direct-to-video, or better yet, be like Tim Thomerson and Billy Blanks and be famous for direct-to-video.
Exactly.
No, thank you, again, brother.
Go ahead.
Thank you once so much. It's been so epic, and who could even predict this amount of fun?
Another great conversation. I really enjoyed it. We'll have to do it again sometime. But yeah, thank you again for coming on, and thank you everybody for listening. We will be back soon. But yeah, have a good one. Bye everybody.
TBS coming to you live.
Hear that? That's the sound of a patient whose health data is protected from a cyber attack. And that's the sound of a financial system that's digitally secured from bad actors. Right now, there's an invisible war being fought on a digital battlefield that impacts what we do every day. That's why at Peraton, we do the can't be done to help protect the vital systems we rely on. Because if we don't, the alternative is unimaginable. Peraton.